There's a strange ritual we all participate in. You sit down to write a resume, and immediately you start lying. Not because you're dishonest, not because you're trying to scam anyone, but because the format itself demands fiction. The resume is supposed to be a document of truth, a record of what you've done, your skills, your experience, your value. But what actually happens is different. What happens is you take messy, complicated reality and force it into a shape that was never designed to hold the truth. Let's say you worked at a company for 3 years. You had projects that went well and projects that quietly disappeared. You worked with people you respected and people you didn't. That's real work. But when you write the resume, you compress it. You pick the wins and delete the losses. You take credit for things that 10 people contributed to. You describe tasks you did once as if they were core responsibilities. Here's what that actually looks like. You attended weekly status meetings with marketing, engineering, and product. You disagreed about priorities. Someone eventually made a decision. On the resume, this becomes collaborated with cross-functional teams to deliver strategic initiatives. You helped launch a feature that got decent user adoption. 3 other people built it. You wrote the project brief. On the resume, spearheaded product launch resulting in 40% user engagement increase. And the thing is, you have to. Because if you don't, someone else will, and their resume will look better than yours, even if their actual work was worse. Resume language is its own species of corporate fiction. It exists nowhere else in the world. Nobody talks like this, nobody writes like this, except on resumes. Synergized, leveraged, facilitated, drove strategic alignment across stakeholder groups. These words mean almost nothing. They're verbal camouflage that makes ordinary work sound transformational. The more senior the role, the more abstract it gets. Junior positions can at least point to concrete tasks, processed invoices, answered customer calls. Those are real. But senior roles operate in vaguer territory, provided strategic leadership during organizational transformation. What does that mean? Usually it means you were in the room when decisions were made. Maybe you influenced some of them. Maybe you just watched them happen. And once you start using these words, you can't stop, because everyone else is using them. Your resume gets compared to their strategically optimized one. Guess which one survives the 15-second scan? Here's where it gets mechanical. You send out your resume, it gets scanned by software before a human even sees it. Applicant tracking systems looking for keywords. If Python isn't on your resume, you don't get the interview. Even if the job barely uses Python, even if you could learn it in a week. So you add it. You list software you used twice, languages you're barely conversational in, frameworks you Googled your way through. Everyone does this, which means the skills section has become meaningless in most cases. Your proficient is someone else's expert. There's no standard, no verification, just confidence and exaggeration competing to pass the robot filter. The hiring managers know this. They know resumes are inflated. They know the language is vague. They know you didn't single-handedly transform anything. But they still use resumes to filter candidates because they don't have a better option. So we end up in this strange equilibrium. You lie a little, they assume you're lying a little, and everyone pretends the system works. If you have a gap in your employment history, you have to explain it, but only in certain ways. Pursued additional education. Focused on family responsibilities. Freelance consulting. Those are the acceptable answers. But what if the truth is different? I was burned out and needed 6 months to recover. I got laid off and it took longer than I expected. I was depressed and barely functional for a while. You can't write that, even though it's real, even though it's common, because the resume has no tolerance for human difficulty. So people learn to manufacture consulting roles that barely existed. They stretch employment dates. They list part-time work as full-time, not because they're con artists, but because the system punishes anyone who stopped generating value for an employer. Here's the deeper problem. Resumes don't capture the things that actually matter at work. How you handle failure, how you work with difficult people, whether anyone wants to be around you for 8 hours a day. Judgment, creativity, resilience, all the things that tend to determine whether you'll succeed in a role. None of that fits in a bullet point. So we've built an entire hiring system around a document that ignores the most important qualities. Think about what makes someone good at their job. Do they stay calm under pressure? Can they admit when they're wrong? Do they make the people around them better? Can they navigate politics without becoming toxic? These determine success or failure, but the resume has no space for them. So we evaluate people based on keywords and dates, and then act surprised when the hire doesn't work out. There's a particular kind of person who thrives in this system. Someone comfortable with self-promotion. Someone who can spin ordinary work into extraordinary achievements. Someone who doesn't feel strange about taking credit for group efforts. That's a personality type. It's not a measure of competence, but the resume rewards it. So we select for confidence over ability, for presentation over substance, for people who are good at describing work instead of people who are good at doing it. I've watched this happen. Competent workers who could walk into a role and excel, but their resumes read like technical documentation. Clear, accurate, unimpressive. Meanwhile, someone with half their ability writes a resume full of strategic framing and action verbs. That person gets the interview, not because they're better, but because they understood the game. Here's the truth that makes this whole thing make sense. The resume isn't a document of truth. It never was. It's a ticket, a filter you have to pass to get to the actual evaluation. The interview is where they verify whether you can do what the resume claims. The first 3 months on the job is where they find out if you were lying. The resume just determines who gets through the door, which means the strategy is obvious, even if it feels uncomfortable. You write for the filter. You use the keywords the software is scanning for. You translate your work into resume dialect. You make your bullets sound impressive enough to survive the 15-second scan, but you also make them verifiable. You attach numbers when you can. You describe things specifically enough that you can tell the real story in the interview. You don't lie about things that will get you caught in the first week, because the resume and the interview are playing different games. The resume is about survival. The interview is about proof. The frustrating answer is you play along. You write the exaggerated bullet points. You use the inflated language. You list the skills you barely have, but you do it knowing what it is, a performance, a translation of reality into a format that was never designed to hold it. You learn to compartmentalize. The resume version of you is optimized for robots and quick scans. The real you is the person who shows up to work, and you make sure the gap between those two versions isn't so wide that you can't deliver on what the resume promised. You prepare the context stories, the ones that explain what spearheaded actually meant, the ones that turn vague bullets into concrete examples, the ones that prove you can do the work even if the resume had to exaggerate to get you in the room. This is where most people get stuck. They think the resume is supposed to be honest, or they think lying harder will solve the problem. But it's neither. It's understanding that resumes are tickets, not truth documents. And tickets have their own language and rules. Maybe someday we'll figure out a better way to evaluate people. Something that captures the messy, complicated truth of work. Something that doesn't punish honesty or reward strategic exaggeration. But that's not today. Today, we still have resumes. We still have a hiring system that asks for clean narratives and simple metrics in a world that runs on messy human work. We still translate years of uncertainty, conflict, learning, and failure into neat bullet points that sound confident and controlled. Not because that's who we are, but because that's what the filter understands. So we make small adjustments. We smooth the edges. We replace context with keywords. We turn collaboration into leadership. We turn participation into ownership. We turn survival into success. And none of it feels great.